What's up, knife lovers? Welcome back to BladeStuff. My name is Chad Swindell, and today we're going to review the Giant Mouse Ace Biblio. Let's do this. Hey everybody, welcome back. Let's jump right in here. Grab a cup of coffee and pull up a chair. And today let's talk about the Giant Mouse Ace Biblio. This is a knife that I unboxed about 4 months ago, which means I'm way behind doing a review on this. And it also means that I've had more pocket time with it to put together a review. So a little bit about this before we get started. The manufacturer is obviously Giant Mouse. This is, as I said, the Ace Biblio, and it is designed, it's a collaboration basically between Jens Anzo and Jesper Voxnaes. They, along with Jim Worth, are Giant Mouse. So Giant Mouse has their GM line where they run about 400 of each design and product, and then they discontinue those, and they also have their Ace line, which is more of a production type of line to provide a similar product at a more economical price. This is going to be the Ace line, as stated in the name, Ace Biblio. So it's going to be one of their production knives, and this knife is made in Maniago, Italy. Okay, so if you're new here, let me explain the process. We're going to break our reviews down into 3 separate categories. We're going to break them down into in pocket, in hand, and in action. Now, the in pocket is going to basically talk about the size of the knife, the weight of the knife, how easy is it to carry, are there already any pros or cons to the carry part of it, how much real estate does it take up in your pocket, that sort of thing. The in hand is going to address how does this knife feel in the hand? How is the deployment? How is the action? Is it fun to play with? Can you fidget with this knife? Is it comfortable? Are there any hot spots? That sort of thing. And the last one is in action. Now this is the one that really matters. This is where we talk about the knife build, what's it made of, how well is it built, and can you count on this thing when you really need it? Because in the end, this is the only one that really matters, right? Okay, so let's start out with the in-pocket category. Now, I carried this thing mainly 2 different ways. I carried this as my primary, which for me would be my front right pocket, and I carried it as my secondary, which would be my left back pocket. And I can honestly say I really didn't have any issues with the carry in either one of those locations. Now, with that being said, everybody kind of has the different likes and dislikes as far as sizes and weights that they like to carry and where they like to carry them. So let's take a look at some of the specs here. Okay, so that's going to be 3.81 ounces on that guy. For its size, it does seem to be a little bit heavy. That doesn't bother me at all, but it actually feels pretty substantial. Let's compare that to Spyderco Sage 5 at 3.26 and the Bug Out at 1.87. So let's look at the size here when it is closed. We are talking about basically a 4-inch knife on that, and the width, including the blade, we got about 1 3/8, almost 1 7/16. So now let's talk about the clip. So it has a wire clip on that, and I have to admit, I am just not the biggest fan of wire clips. It's just my opinion, but I think it makes a knife look a little cheaper than it really is. Now, that being said, I have to admit that of the wire clipped knives that I've carried, this one probably has been the best, and the clip did its job. So things to look at with a clip. You know, that ramp there. You know, if you got too much of a ramp going in, it's going to catch a lot of stuff when you walk by it or whatever, and you're going to spring that clip. If it doesn't have enough of a ramp when you're trying to, you know, put it in your pocket, then, you know, you're going to have to pinch it and open that up to be able to get it in your pocket. And I'll have to say that I didn't have any issues with this as well, so I thought that was well designed. So it is technically a deep carry clip, which means whatever you're going to be putting it in is going to go all the way up to the top of that clip. However, you've still got a little bit of knife exposed, so don't misunderstand and think that just because it has a deep carry clip that you're going to have that knife seated fully in your pocket, because you're not. You're going to have about that much sticking out of your pocket. So really, all in all, even though I'm not a fan of wire clips, this one wasn't really too bad. Now let's talk about retrieval. For me, when I have a knife, you know, seated in my pocket, I like to be able to get it out quick if I need it. So when you're reaching for your knife, even though there's not a whole lot of texture on these scales, you still have a pretty good grip. Now maybe that's because this is exposed. I really don't know, but I didn't have a problem with retrieval, so I was able to get the knife out when I needed it and didn't have to dig for it or anything like that. So it's a win there as well. Okay, now let's talk about the in-hand category. Now, this is the category where we're going to talk about anything from the aesthetics of the knife to the ergos, the deployment, the fidget factor, you know, that sort of thing. So let's start off with the scales. The scales are a burgundy micarta, and honestly, the scales look really good. They've bead blasted these scales to give it a slight bit of texture as well. So I have no complaints with the scales. The scales are really good looking, and the color of the scales, I think, in contrast to the satin finish and the satin hardware, I actually think is really pretty, really gorgeous. One thing about micarta that you probably already know is that it's going to change color over time, and that's due to the oils in your skin and everything. So it is actually going to, you know, provide a deeper finish as time goes on. Now, I mentioned a little earlier that I wasn't fond of wire clips. Here's another reason why. Look at the micarta underneath that wire clip that's exposed. That's a lot lighter. That's because it hasn't seen those oils, because you can't reach in there and touch it very easy. So that's the color that would have came out initially. Now, I have no issue with the micarta changing colors. I actually, you know, like that deeper color. But another reason that I think maybe a solid clip there would hide that contrast and that difference. Is it a big deal? No, not really, but it is noticeable if you're looking for it. Let's go ahead and open this thing up. The open grip is pretty good. Now it's got this you know, cutout for your finger there. I really do like that. It kind of, you know, locks your hand in. Now this is a little bit small for me. I like a little bit bigger knife. So for me, this is a 3-finger knife. That pinky's not getting any traction there. It's just hanging off of the edge of the knife. Now that being said, the micarta being thicker and contoured actually makes up a little bit of that gap, because it fits my hand a little bit better. Now, I would still like it to be a little bit longer on that, but it doesn't have a bad grip for a 3-finger grip. Now, it does have a finger choil here. And actually, before I get to that, with that 3-finger grip, you know, my thumb actually wants to land about right there. Notice where the jimping's at. The jimping is a little bit further up. That's the way that they do their jimping. And my thumb is wanting to land about right here with that when I'm gripping it, just like this right here. Now, I will say that the spine of this is slightly crowned, which is a very cool feature and makes that a very comfortable place for your thumb to land. I mean, technically you could put your finger or thumb anywhere you wanted on that, and it's going to feel just fine. Now, when you choke up on it with this finger choil, that's when things really get interesting. So when you use this grip right there, that is super comfortable. Now that gives me the 4 fingers that I like. That may be why I like this grip, because I feel like I have more control over the knife and I have all 4 fingers on it. It also places my thumb just right there on that jimping. So I feel like I have a really good, solid grip with this knife. So really overall, I feel like the grip is pretty well. My preference is gripping up like I mentioned, and I feel like you get a really good, solid grip at that point. It is balanced well. I don't feel like there's too much weight on the blade or too much weight on the handle necessarily. Everything marries up pretty well. So that's pretty much it for the ergonomics. Let's talk about the deployment and action a little bit. Now, it is a flipper style knife, and it is very snappy. So the detent is just stiff enough that once you overcome that, it snaps out very well. And it is a snappy knife, and I like snappy knives, so I have no issue with the detent on this at all. This particular knife I feel like is dialed in very, very good. It does not have a thumb stud, of course. It has this oblong hole. I don't know what shape that you would call that, but if you decide that you want to open it with your thumb, you know, I don't know if it's the shape of that or the design of the knife or both, but a lot of knives that have, you know, the holes in them, the knife is going to stick a lot further out. You know, the knife blade is going to stick a lot further out from the pivot. Now, I don't have a problem with that necessarily. Maybe it's a little wider. This one though is inset in that finger groove. So it's almost just like the size and the shape of that hole. When you put your thumb in it, in addition to that finger groove there, you're just automatically lined up to get a very good deployment on that. Now you can also reverse flick it without any issues at all. So the detent, I think, is just strong enough that all of those deployment methods work really, really good. I have zero complaints on the deployment whatsoever. The shutting action on this knife is very good. So it's riding on bearings, which means that it's going to be a smooth ride. Now, I will say that the lock bar on this is very stiff. It's got a good lockup. I don't have any issues with that. I think due to that stiffness there on the lock bar, it makes it where it's not drop shut. I know a lot of people say that's because of the size of the blade, and that does make a difference, but I think in this case the biggest factor is the pressure that lock bar is putting on there. At least this particular knife, because there's a lot of pressure there. You gotta push really hard, harder than normal, to get that. Now it's doable. It's easily overcome. I can do it with my right or my left hand, but it's just a little bit more pressure than normal. The aesthetics of this knife are very appealing to me. Things that stand out to me are, as I mentioned, the contrast between this gorgeous burgundy micarta and this satin finish. Those two colors together really make this knife pop. If it had other hardware other than satin, I don't know that I'd like it, but those two together really make this pop. The design of the knife, it's got that sheepfoot type blade. It's just kind of intriguing. I do like that it's got enough belly on that knife that you've got some good cutting. It's a saber grind, so you can get some really good cutting action, some slicing action with this knife. The blade finish is going to be a satin finish, and so it's going to show scratches a little bit more than, say, a stonewash finish would do. But I will tell you this, it shows fingerprints like crazy, so I've got to continually, you know, wipe this thing off to clean those fingerprints up. Now, if you remember a few months ago when I did the unboxing on this, the centering was very good, but as you can see, it is no longer good. It is favoring the show side, and it has play in that now. I have intentionally not adjusted that for the sake of this review to give it an honest and fair review, but I don't think that it's going to be a big issue. I think that I'm just going to need to adjust the pivot, which I plan on doing at the end of this video so that you can see the outcome. The feel of this knife, it doesn't feel bulky to me, and it doesn't feel lightweight to me, so it has a good balance feel, I think. Since this is a smaller knife, I think that little additional weight or bulk or thickness here may be just helping to compensate for the fact that it's a little smaller than I like to carry. This knife sounds good on deployment. You know me, for some reason that matters, right? Not really, but it shouldn't, at least. But I do like a good sounding knife, and this does deliver there. It sounds good for its size. It sounds like it's not a toy, that it is the tool that it is intended to be. So in regards to the fidget factor, is this a knife that you can play with? I think that it is. And you know, transparently, there's few knives that I have that I don't, but some are funner to fidget with than others. And this is a good knife to play with. So I would absolutely say that this is a knife that you could play with and fidget with and will enjoy doing so. Okay, so now let's get into the in-action category. Really, this is the important one to me. I like the fidget factor. I like the aesthetics. I like all of that. But if you can't depend on a knife, then why carry it? So this is the category where we're going to talk about the knife build, what's it made of, and can you count on this thing? So let's start with the lockup. The type of lockup on this is going to be a liner lock. They've used 420 hardened steel, bead blasted for the liner lock here. And as I mentioned before, it is very stiff, but the lockup is good and you don't have any play. You don't have any lock rock or anything there. So the lockup is very good on this thing. We've already talked about the clip a little bit and how, you know, wire clips are not my favorite clips. This one really didn't give me a whole lot of problems, and it retained the knife. It did what it was supposed to do. So if you're gonna carry a knife, you want it to have retention. Wherever you decide to put it, you want it to stay there until you need it, because you don't want it falling out of your pocket or your backpack or whatever, and then when you need it, well, lo and behold, it's not there. So this clip did its job for me. It did keep the knife in my pocket. So the pivot type on this is ball bearings. That means that you should have a smooth and reliable ride. And so far, I can definitely attest to that. It has been smooth. I've got zero issues with that pivot system, other than in this particular case, this pivot loosened up on me during my carry. And so I don't know if this is going to be a knife that I'm just gonna have to continually tune up, which I don't have a problem with necessarily. But I intentionally did not adjust it until this video, like I said, to give a complete, honest review of what my findings were. Now the blade steel. The blade steel on this is Bowler M390 Micro Clean. It is not labeled anywhere on the blade. However, it is going to be, if you take the scales off on, I don't remember which side, it's going to identify the steel underneath those scales. Now I like M390 a lot. It is one of my favorite steels. I can tell you this, that the M390 it features high wear and corrosion resistance. That's always good. It's also a fine grained alloy. Now, the finer the grain when they're making the steel is going to reduce the chance of fractures in that blade, right? And so I do like the fact that it is a fine-grained alloy. It's a very popular choice for high-end folders, and you'll see this steel a lot. So speaking of the blade, it's got this, you know, sheepfoot style blade on it, which I do think is attractive. It is unique, definitely, but it's just pretty cool. The geometry on this, it's going to be a saber grind. It's going to be a flat grind on that. And let's see here. Let's get some specs. So going from 1185 down to, I won't go all the way to the tip, 340, 930. So you can see the taper on that. So you've got pretty good strength all the way down to, you know, it starts getting thin right about there, but you lose the flat, you know, right here. So it begins to taper at that point. It does have that saber grind on it, which gives you very slicey performance. Now, as far as sharpening challenges are concerned, you know, there's a variety of ways to sharpen your knives, and personally, I sharpen mine in a variety of ways. You know, sometimes I freehand sharpen, sometimes I use guided systems. If you do use a guided system, you have enough flat here to be able to clamp that up. But the most important thing that I see here is, you know, this finger choil also adds as a sharpening choil. So, you know, when you're coming down here, you don't have to worry about running into those edges. So I do not think that there is any sharpening challenges on this knife, just to be honest. So we talked about the grip a little bit earlier in the forms of comfort, but what about use? Now, use on this thing, I feel like that it does lock your hand in. So if you needed to use this thing, you know, an emergency type of situation or a hard use situation, I do feel like that you can do that without risk of cutting yourself. Now, the most comfortable grip for me is when I choke up and use that finger twill. Now, when you do that, you know, I'm gonna be pretty skeptical about using it in a hard use type of situation. Why? Because that right there could easily cut my finger. So I feel vulnerable, you know, at that point. Now, it does lock in both ways you wanted to hold it, so it's very comfortable, but would I be comfortable using it hard use with this type of grip? No, probably not. So the grip on a knife is just important, because who cares if you've checked all the other boxes and you've got the right steel that you want, you've got the right look that you want, and it just fidgets well and all that, but if you can't hang on to it, if you do really need it, then it's basically useless to you. So the grip on a knife is very, very important. The jimping is a little further up. I did mention that earlier, and I'm a little mixed on my opinion of that jimping. And so I covered it a little bit earlier, but when I hold it just like this, you can see my thumb landed just kind of at the end. I mean, I may catch a couple of those jumps is where my thumb lands, so it's not terrible, but where it really lines up is when I get that finger twill and it puts my thumb right on it. I would say my overall opinion of this knife in the in-action category would be good. The one thing that I would possibly pick on it a little bit for is on this particular knife, as I've already mentioned, then this pivot has loosened up on me. And I don't really like that. Now, you know, I play with my knives and sharpen my knives, and so I get them out and fidget with them, so I don't have a problem tuning it up, but everybody may not be that way. So you need to know that, you know, that could be an issue. Now, with full disclaimer, I did not buy this knife brand new. I did buy it used, so, you know, keep that in mind as well. Would I tell you to avoid buying this knife because of that? No, I actually think it's a pretty nice little knife. I just need to be completely honest about it. Overall, this knife in all three categories that I've mentioned, I like the knife. I really do. It's a neat knife, and I tell you what, it makes me want the larger version. I just dropped it. It makes me want the larger version because the comfort on this, the look of it, I would really like to experience that in the step up from the Biblio. So overall opinion is going to be a good job at Giant Mouse. Now let's see, as I mentioned, what we can do about getting this guy centered again. So I don't know if you can hear it, but that is play in there because this pivot has loosened up. And as you can see, it is not centered. It's not touching, but I don't want it to get any worse than that. So we're gonna take a T8. I'm going to push to the other side a little bit, and I'm going to tighten that pivot. Okay, that helped a lot, actually. I'm going to give it just a little bit more. Okay, so I tightened that pivot down. I mean, that was super easy to do. I tightened the pivot down, and that's corrected the centering. It still opens and closes very well, and I have no play. So it was that easy to fix it on this knife, and I assumed it would be, and that's only because I had, you know, the unboxing where I tested it, and I had a tight pivot and a centered knife, and then 4 months later it was both loose up here and uncentered. So there you have it, the review of the Giant Mouse Ace Biblio. This knife is made with good components by good designers, and overall I think it is a very nice knife. Thank you for watching the review of the Giant Mouse Ace Biblio. If you liked our content, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. For those of you that have already done so, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate your support. Until next time, God bless. Keep it sharp.